Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Learning English Studio, where learning English is easy and fun. I'm Amelia.
Hello, Amelia. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here.
Hi, James. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you. And you? You look very happy today.
I am very happy today. I'm excited for our topic today.
Oh, yes, it's a very good topic. Very important.
Yes, exactly. But before we start, everyone, please remember to subscribe to our channel, yes, and click the like button, and please share our podcast with your friends and family. It helps us a lot. It really does. Okay, so James, are you ready?
I'm absolutely ready, Amelia. I've been looking forward to this conversation all day.
Perfect. Today, we're going to talk about something that's so fundamental to who we are, our habits, and more importantly, how to talk about your habits in English. This is such a practical topic that will help you sound more natural when you speak.
Absolutely. Think about how often we talk about what we usually do, what we always do, or what we never do. These are all habits, and being able to express them clearly in English is such an important skill.
That's so true. And the great thing about habits is that they give us a perfect opportunity to practice the present simple tense, which is one of the most important tenses in English.
Exactly. And we'll also cover frequency adverbs like always, usually, often, sometimes, and never. These are essential for talking about habits.
I love that. And we'll make it fun and practical with lots of real-life examples that you can use right away. So let's start with the basics. When we talk about habits, we usually use the present simple tense, right?
That's right. The present simple is used for repeated actions, routines, and habits. So instead of saying, I am waking up at 7 a.m. every day, present continuous, we say, I wake up at 7 a.m. every day. Present simple.
That's such a clear explanation. And I think it's helpful to know that for most verbs in the present simple, we just use the base form of the verb. For example, I wake, you wake, we wake, they wake.
Exactly. But for the third person singular, he, she, it, we add s to the verb. So he wakes, she wakes, it wakes. This is a rule that many learners forget, but it's so important.
That's such an important point. And there are some spelling rules for adding s too, right? Like studies for verbs ending in y, or watches for verbs ending in ch, sh, s, x, or z.
That's so true. And for verbs ending in o, we add es, like goes or does. And there are some irregular verbs like have becomes has, do becomes does, and go becomes goes.
Those are such important details. Let's start with some daily habits. James, what are some of your morning habits?
Well, I always wake up at 7 a.m. on weekdays. The first thing I do is check my phone for any important messages. Then I usually go to the bathroom to brush my teeth and wash my face. After that, I typically make a cup of coffee. I can't function without it.
I think many people feel that way about coffee. I noticed you used always, usually, and typically, all great frequency adverbs for talking about habits.
Exactly. And I use the present simple. Wake up, do, go, brush, wash, make, and can't function. All in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your morning habits, Amelia? Well, I usually wake up around 6:30 a.m. I always start my day with a glass of water. It helps me feel refreshed. Then I often do some light stretching for about 10 minutes. After that, I typically take a shower and get dressed for the day.
Those sound like healthy habits. I noticed you used usually, always, often, and typically, a nice variety of frequency adverbs.
Thank you. And I used the present simple, wake up, start, do, take, and get dressed, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. Let's move on to afternoon and evening habits. What are some of your work or study habits, James?
Well, at work, I always check my emails first thing in the morning. I usually make a to-do list for the day. I often take a short break around 11 a.m. to stretch my legs. I typically have lunch around 12:30 p.m. In the afternoon, I sometimes have meetings, but I usually try to focus on my most important tasks.
Those sound like productive work habits. I noticed you used always, usually, often, typically, and sometimes. You're really showing us the full range of frequency adverbs.
Ha, I guess I am. And I use the present simple: check, make, take, have, try, and focus, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your work habits, Amelia? Well, I always start my workday by reviewing my calendar and priorities. I usually tackle the most challenging task first thing in the morning when my energy is high. I often take a short walk during my lunch break to get some fresh air. I typically wrap up my workday by organizing my desk and making a to-do list for the next day.
Those sound like very organized work habits. I noticed you used always, usually, often, and typically. Great use of frequency adverbs.
Thank you. And I used the present simple: start, tackle, take, wrap up, and make, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. Let's talk about evening habits. What are some of your evening habits, James? Well, after work, I usually go to the gym 3 times a week. On the days I don't go to the gym, I often cook dinner at home. I typically eat dinner around 7 p.m. After dinner, I sometimes call my family or friends to catch up. I always brush my teeth before bed, and I usually try to be in bed by 11 p.m.
Those sound like healthy evening habits. I noticed you used usually, often, typically, sometimes, always, and usually again. You're really showing us how to use these adverbs naturally.
Thanks. And I use the present simple: go, cook, eat, watch, read, brush, and try, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your evening habits, Amelia? Well, I usually practice yoga for about 30 minutes after work. I often prepare dinner while listening to music or a podcast. I typically eat around 6:30. After dinner, I sometimes call my family or friends to catch up. I always write in a journal before bed. It helps me reflect on my day. I usually read a few pages of a book before turning off the lights around 10:30.
Those sound like lovely evening habits. I noticed you used usually, often, typically, sometimes, always, and usually again. You're really showing us how to use these adverbs naturally.
Thank you. And I used the present simple: practice, prepare, eat, call, write, and read, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. I think it's helpful for our listeners to hear how we naturally use the present simple and frequency adverbs when talking about our habits.
Absolutely. Let's think about some other types of habits beyond daily routines. What are some of your weekend habits, James?
Well, on Saturday mornings, I usually go grocery shopping. I often meet friends for lunch or coffee on Saturdays. On Sundays, I typically do laundry and clean my apartment. I always try to relax a bit on Sunday evenings to prepare for the week ahead.
Those sound like typical weekend habits. I noticed you used usually, often, typically, and always. Perfect for describing your weekend routine.
Thanks. And I use the present simple: go, meet, do, clean, and try, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your weekend habits, Amelia? Well, on Saturday mornings, I usually go to a yoga class. I often visit my parents on Saturday afternoons. On Sundays, I typically meal prep for the week. It makes my weekdays so much easier. I always try to spend some time in nature on weekends, even if it's just a short walk in the park.
Those sound like healthy and balanced weekend habits. I noticed you used usually, often, typically, and always. Great use of frequency adverbs.
Thank you. And I used the present simple: go, visit, meal prep, and try, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. Let's think about other types of habits. What are some of your health and fitness habits, James? Well, I try to exercise at least 3 times a week. I always drink lots of water throughout the day. I usually avoid eating too much junk food, though I sometimes indulge on weekends. I typically get a health checkup once a year. I never smoke. I think it's a terrible habit.
Those sound like very healthy habits. I noticed you used try to. I wanted to show you the full range, and I used the present simple. Start, take, meditate, get, drink, and eat, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. I think it's helpful for our listeners to understand the different levels of frequency, from always, 100% of the time, to usually, about 80%, often, about 60%, sometimes, about 40%, rarely, about 20%, and never, 0%.
That's such a clear explanation, and there are other frequency adverbs too, like normally, regularly, occasionally, seldom, and hardly ever.
Exactly. And you can also use expressions like every day, once a week, twice a month, 3 times a year, etc., to be more specific about frequency.
That's so true. Let's think about some other types of habits. What are some of your learning or personal development habits, James?
Well, I always try to learn something new every day. I usually read for at least 30 minutes before bed. I often listen to educational podcasts during my commute. I typically take an online course once or twice a year. I sometimes attend workshops or seminars on weekends.
Those sound like great learning habits. I noticed you used always try to, usually, often, typically, and sometimes, perfect for describing your learning routine.
Thanks. And I use the present simple, try, read, listen, take, and attend, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your learning habits, Amelia? Well, I always review my English vocabulary for 10 minutes every day. I usually watch TED Talks or educational videos on YouTube. I often practice speaking with language exchange partners. I typically set learning goals for myself each month. I sometimes write blog posts in English to practice my writing skills.
Those sound like excellent language learning habits. I noticed you used always, usually, often, typically, and sometimes. Great use of frequency adverbs.
Thank you. And I use the present simple. Review, watch, practice, set, and write, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your learning habits, Amelia?
Well, I always review my English vocabulary for 10 minutes every day. I usually watch TED Talks or educational videos on YouTube. I often practice speaking with language exchange partners. I typically set learning goals for myself each month. I sometimes write blog posts in English to practice my writing skills.
Those sound like excellent language learning habits. I noticed you used always, usually, often, typically, and sometimes. Great use of frequency adverbs.
Thank you. And I use the present simple. Review, watch, practice, set, and write, all in the correct form.
That's perfect. What are some of your learning habits, Amelia?
Let's think about some common questions you might ask or answer about habits. For example, what do you usually do in the morning? Or do you often exercise?
Those are perfect. And you could ask more specific questions like, how often do you read? What time do you usually wake up? Or do you ever drink coffee in the afternoon?
Exactly. And I think it's helpful to know that when we answer these questions, we often start with, well, or let me think, to give ourselves a moment to consider our habits.
That's so true. Natural conversation isn't just about correct grammar, it's also about the flow and rhythm of speech.
Exactly. Let's think about some common mistakes that learners make when talking about their habits. That could be really helpful for our listeners.
Good question. I think one common mistake is using the wrong tense, like saying, I am waking up at 7 a.m. every day, instead of, I wake up at 7 a.m. every day.
That's such a common mistake. Another one is forgetting to add S to the third person singular, like saying, he wake up at 7 a.m. every day, instead of, he wakes up at 7 a.m. every day.
That's so true. And I think another common mistake is using frequency adverbs in the wrong position. For example, saying, I wake up usually at 7 a.m. instead of I usually wake up at 7 a.m.
Oh, that's a big one. Frequency adverbs usually go before the main verb, but after the verb to be. So you'd say, I am usually tired, but I feel tired usually.
That's such an important point. And I think another mistake is using every day as one word when it should be two words. Many learners write every day instead of every day.
Exactly. And I think it's helpful for learners to remember that every day, one word, is an adjective meaning common or ordinary, while every day, two words, means each day.
That's such a clear explanation. Let's think about some strategies for learning and remembering how to talk about habits in English.
Good idea. I think one helpful strategy is to associate different habits with different frequency adverbs. For example, things you do without fail are always, things you do most of the time are usually, and things you do only occasionally are sometimes.
That's such a smart approach. Another strategy is to make sentences about your own habits using different frequency adverbs. The more personal the sentences, the easier they are to remember.
Absolutely. And I think it's helpful to practice asking and answering questions about habits with a partner or language exchange friend. It makes the practice more interactive and fun.
That's a great idea. Let's think about some different contexts where you might need to talk about your habits in English. It's not just in language classes, right?
Oh, definitely. You might talk about your habits when you're getting to know someone new, at a doctor's appointment, or even in a job interview when they ask about your work habits.
That's so true. And the way you talk about your habits might change depending on who you're talking to and what you want to emphasize.
Exactly. With friends, you might be more casual and detailed, while in a job interview, you might focus on positive work habits like, I always meet deadlines, or I typically organize my workspace at the end of each day.
That's such a good point. And I think it's helpful to practice describing both good habits and bad habits. Not all our habits are positive, and being able to talk about them honestly is part of authentic communication.
Absolutely. You could say things like, I sometimes procrastinate when I have a big project, or I often check my phone too frequently during the day.
That's so true. And being able to talk about habits you want to change is also useful. You could say, I'm trying to exercise more often, or I want to reduce the amount of sugar I eat.
Exactly. And I think it's helpful to learn some phrases for talking about changing habits. For example, I used to, but now or I'm trying to break the habit of.
Those are perfect. Let's think about some more advanced vocabulary for talking about habits.
Good idea. You could describe habits as daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. You could talk about morning routines, evening rituals, or weekend patterns.
Those are great. And you could use more specific verbs and expressions, like I make a habit of, or I have a tendency to, or I'm in the habit of.
I like make a habit of. That's such a useful expression. And you could say, I'm a creature of habit to describe someone who likes to do the same things in the same way.
Those are great examples. And I think it's helpful to learn some idioms related to habits, like old habits die hard. It's difficult to change a habit that you've had for a long time. Or break the habit, stop doing something that has become a habit.
Absolutely. Idioms can make your English sound much more natural and fluent. Just make sure you understand how to use them correctly.
That's such an important point. Using idioms incorrectly can sometimes sound funny or confusing. Exactly. And I think it's helpful for learners to practice talking about both your habits and the habits of people you know. For example, my brother always drinks coffee in the morning, or my friend never goes to bed before midnight.
That's so true. And it's good practice for the third-person singular S ending, which many learners find tricky.
Absolutely. Let's think about some common phrases we use when talking about habits. There are some fixed expressions that are really useful.
Good idea. What are some common phrases you can think of?
Well, there's by habit, which means as a result of a habit. For example, by habit, I always check my phone first thing in the morning.
That's a good one. What else?
There's force of habit, which means you do something because you've always done it, not because you've decided to do it. For example, I kept checking my phone out of force of habit even though I was on vacation.
Those are perfect. And you could use phrases like creature of habit or set in your ways to describe someone who doesn't like to change their habits.
Exactly. And I think it's helpful to learn some phrases for responding when someone tells you about their habits. You could say, "That's a great habit," or "I should try that," or "I have the same habit."
That's so true. Conversation is a two-way street, and knowing how to respond appropriately is just as important as knowing how to share about yourself.
Absolutely. And I think it's okay to keep it simple when you're starting out. You don't need to describe every habit in detail. Just share a few key habits that give people a sense of who you are.
That's such good advice. It's about giving a general picture, not a complete inventory of your habits.
Exactly. And I think it's also okay to say, "I don't really have any special habits," or "My routine changes a lot," if that's the case. Not everyone is a creature of habit.
That's so true, and it's important to be able to express that in English too. Let's think about some practice activities our listeners could do to improve their ability to talk about their habits.
Good idea. Well, the obvious one is to describe your own daily habits, either out loud or in writing. Try to use different frequency adverbs appropriately.
That's a great start. And you could also try to describe the habits of your family members or friends. That's good practice for the third-person singular.
Absolutely. And you could try to keep a habits journal for a week, noting down what you do each day and how often. Then you can look back and describe your habits using frequency adverbs.
I love that idea. And you could also try to compare your habits with how you used to do things in the past. That's great practice for using both present and past tenses.
Exactly. And for more advanced learners, you could try to write a short article or blog post about the importance of good habits. That's a great way to practice more complex sentences and vocabulary.
Those are all fantastic suggestions. I think the key is to make it relevant and personal to you. If you're talking about something that matters to you, you'll be more motivated to learn the language to express it.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is an opportunity to learn and improve. That's how we all learn, isn't it?
That's so true. I think it's helpful to remember that even native speakers sometimes hesitate or correct themselves when they're talking about their habits. Language is messy and imperfect, and that's okay.
Exactly. The goal is communication, not perfection. As long as people can understand what you're trying to say about your habits, you're succeeding.
That's such an important perspective. Let's think about some cultural differences in habits. That could be really interesting for our listeners.
Oh, definitely. In some cultures, people have very structured daily routines, while in others, schedules might be more flexible and spontaneous.
That's so true. And eating habits can vary greatly between cultures. When people eat, what they eat, how they eat, and with whom.
Exactly. And I think it's great for learners to be able to talk about their own cultural habits in English. It's a wonderful way to share and learn about different ways of life.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting to think about how habits change throughout our lives. The habits of a student are different from those of a working professional, which are different from those of a retiree.
That's such an interesting point. And it just goes to show that language is not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's also about life stages, culture, and personal identity.
That's so true. Well, James, we've covered so much ground today, from basic present tense forms to advanced vocabulary, from common mistakes to learning strategies.
We really have. And I hope our listeners have found it helpful and inspiring. Remember, talking about your habits is such a practical and useful skill in English.
Absolutely. And it's a great way to share who you are and connect with others. Everyone has habits, so it's a topic that connects us all.
Exactly. So keep practicing, keep learning, and don't be afraid to share your habits with others in English.
That's perfect advice. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining us on Learning English Studio.
Yes, thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into talking about your habits in English. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our podcast if you found it helpful.
We'll be back next week with another useful topic for English learners. Until then, keep practicing and develop wonderful habits.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.